Hey everyone. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We're very excited for the latest installment of our guest speaker series. Bear with me through this intro. I have to individually admit everyone. So if you hear some dings coming from my end, that is why. But thanks again to everyone who showed up tonight. My name is Shannon Sheehy. I am the Manager of Strategic Partnerships for Code Louisville and Code Kentucky, which is a fancy way of saying that I manage our career teams here. And one of the pieces that we really put a lot of emphasis on is networking and meeting folks in tech who maybe are outside of people that you would normally be connected with. So we're really excited to continue this Monday guest speaker series. Before we get to our speaker tonight, just a couple updates and kind of housekeeping items for everybody. So we do have more guest speakers planned out over the next several weeks. Next week on August 21st, we are going to have a speaker on agile methodologies. The following week on August 28th, we're going to have a presentation from one of our data mentors on career paths in data analytics. And then nothing on Labor Day. And then on September 11th, we'll have a talk on AWS certifications from one of our former mentors. So we're looking forward to all of those. Our careers team is also working on quite a few hiring events. We send out a tech careers newsletter to folks who have already completed the program. So if that's you, be sure to keep an eye out. For modular folks, if you're attending tonight as part of your career readiness requirement, please be sure to fill out the form in Google Classroom to get credit for attending. You can let me know if you have any questions on that. Just a couple housekeeping items, so please do keep yourself muted through the presentation piece. There is a chat, so if you want to ask any questions or if you have any comments you'd like to make, feel free to do so. There's a little chat icon that should be on the bottom right of your screen. It looks like a little dialog box, so feel free to post things there, and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well to help answer any questions that I may be able to answer. So with that, tonight we are joined by Auroriah Morgan, who's a former participant in our program who now has gone on to mentor for us, which is awesome. Auroriah is going to be presenting tonight on React Framework. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Shannon. How's everybody doing? Glad to be here to show y'all how to use React. A little bit about myself. I've been developing for about 4 years now, 5 years. Kind of in the freelance department, mainly because I had a job maybe like a few months ago, back until November. They let a bunch of people go. It's been kind of hard getting back in, so I've kind of like just kind of take things on my own hand and been working on projects mainly with a company called Mercer Transportation for building a React app on AWS. And then also I work with my family company, Morgan Security, and helping them with any tech issues or website things that they need, kind of officially and unofficially at times. But other than that, my primary focus is JavaScript language. I've been working with React since probably 2019, and went through all the changes that has gone over the time. And hopefully now I can present y'all with what I know about it and what the documents have for the latest, and get y'all on the road to being able to use React if you choose to in the future. Let me try to show my screen. All right. I'm not sure if everybody can see the slides. Believe
it looks
can.
Good on my end, Auroriah.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go through a basic overview of what React is, an introduction, a couple of the key points of React with the overview, basically creating and nesting components, how you write markup for it, and JSX. Then we'll go over installing and choosing a framework with React. And then I have 2 small demos, nothing too crazy, that I'll walk through and just show you some kind of key points about the app or go over things that we showed during that overview. And then at the end, I'll take any questions, and I have a slide with the sources that you can go to gain more information and try this out for yourself. So starting out, what is React? React is an open source front-end JavaScript library for building user interfaces. The key word there is user interfaces. React, the library itself, doesn't give you anything else out the box. No data fetching, no routing or anything like that. It's solely made for making components to display data to the user on the front end. However, you can use other tools or libraries to enhance React and get the tools that you need for data fetching. Data fetching or single page mobile or server-side rendering and things like that with other frameworks or libraries. One of them frameworks being Next.js, for example. We're going to go through creating and nesting components, the markup in JSX, styling, displaying data, conditional rendering and rendering lists, events, updating views, hooks, and sharing data between components. All these are the basics that you would need to go through creating a React app. I'm not going too in depth with everything, but it's basically what the React docs go through as well to tell you how to get started. And so that's what I pretty much based off this most of. For creating and nesting components. In React, you basically build your UI with what they call components, which is a piece of UI that has its own logic and appearance. Components are nothing more than JavaScripts that return markup. And for React, the only rule that you have is you have to make sure that your components or your functions start with a capital letter, which is usually not common practice in JavaScripting, but for React, that's how I can tell between HTML tags and React component tags. So as you can see, maybe I'm not sure if it's too small, but on the bottom of there, I guess a basic example of a button being created. It's just called function of my button and returns HTML, regular button HTML tag. And if you're familiar with HTML and JavaScript, it shouldn't look too different of how you add a button in HTML. The markup in React is known as JSX. It's just basically it's optional for using React, but it's mostly used in all of the projects that you would with React. It's stricter than HTML, and it's required in order to use multiple JSX tags. It's required that you have them all within a parent div, whether it's a div or a fragment as shown here in this example where the yellow highlights are. So if I wanted like a div and another one and label, for example, in the input, it has to be within a parent. There's tools to convert your HTML to JSX as it's not the same as HTML exactly. And the reason that JSX is considered optional is because anything that you could do with JSX could be done with just pure JavaScript itself. That's kind of more of an advanced technique, and I don't really have any examples of that right now. For React and the styling, it's pretty much the same. You specify your CSS with a class name. The only difference being that in React, instead of using class like you would on an attribute of an HTML tag, you use class name and camel casing, as you can see in the green lettering on the screen. You use CSS the same way as you would most HTML, JavaScript, basic vanilla web development. I'll show an example of that later on, but basically you would add a link tag to your HTML document and that bring in the CSS to allow you to do such a thing. So I know this one's pretty small, but we have a P tag here that has a class name called read the docs. And then the CSS class itself, read the docs, would be from the CSS file that you pull in. Certain frameworks do have different ways of allowing you to use CSS or adding additional tools like Tailwind or any other like pre-processors or post-processors with CSS. And then the best way to find out how to do that is just consulting the documentation for those. In React, if you want to present data in a list, which is pretty common especially if you're showing things like from a database, you got your tools. You can use JavaScript, for loops, and the array map functions. I have sources at the last slide. Show you we can get more information on those two functions if you are not familiar with them. But those are the main keys to using rendering lists on React. Another thing about rendering lists on React is using the key attribute. And that allows the React to basically keep track of your listed items so that you can perform CRUD operations on them, or updating them, or deleting them and removing them, and it still holds place of where that display data is supposed to be at. So basically, here's an example here. It got a list of items that come from an array called products. You run the map function on products, and each product would present a li tag or list item. The difference here, if you notice though, is when I'm doing the return after the arrow key here, the return, you use parentheses to send out the HTML tags. And for each one, you have to have this attribute called key. And usually when you have a key on this attribute, you want to take it from a unique value, a string, or a number. And you could use something like your database ID, for example. The reason for this is that React basically is like it has its own UI tree, a shadow DOM, if you will, that it tracks any updates made to any visuals from the back end. It will update it and keep track of it, and only render things that need to be changed at the time. So if you added a new item here and removed one, if it had conflicting key IDs, React would give you a warning saying that. It would still allow you to run it, but it would say that, you know, 2 or more items are sharing the same unique ID, and it could get into issues later on if you were trying to be specifically updating one of those items. You might get mixed up or not show that item or not remove it. Event handling in React. So pretty much similar to event handling in JavaScript. The difference being that you would do a function within inside of a function for your event handlers. For example, here we got this function, handle click. It's just gonna pop up an alert, and you would run that on your buttons on click method, showing down here. Passing that to the button, so when you click it, it'll just run the event. This is a basic example, but that's just how you would do it. One thing to note, when you add any type of JavaScript, to escape into JavaScript or out of JavaScript, you use curly braces. So as these attributes here has the curly braces, handle click, you could run any type of JavaScript within them curly braces, and even like adding numbers together or any valid JavaScript could be ran in there. In this case, like if I wanted to, I could even do an arrow function within these curly braces for the handle click and just have the alert down within that on click attribute versus writing it at the top. But it's more convenient and readable, you know, of course, to separate it and just add it in by the name on the on click. So updating the view in React. React keeps track of anything that you want to update or change by a thing called state, basically. And with React, it uses what they call use state, which is a React hook. More on hooks later on. But basically, to track anything from either numbers increasing, or in this case, it's showing an example from the demo I made. It has an array called squares that we want to update eventually for a tic-tac-toe game. So basically, this use state is you just structure 2 things from the use state function that React provides, the hook that it provides, one being the actual value and another being the function to update that value. The convention for writing use state with React is something, comma, set something. And so for here, we got squares and then set squares. And for the default, you would put it inside the parentheses of the use state function call as a parameter. And in my case, I'm just creating an array and filling it with null values, array of 9 squares, and adding it with null values. Down here is just another example of an event handler that we pass down to a button, the handle click, and this is where you'd usually call your set squares within your event handler. So like anytime you update state, you want to do it in a controlled nature. There's also a hook called use effect, which goes along with use state. And that's just more for if you had to bring in and update a value as it was loading or after a certain other value changed, that change that value, you can do like operations within that. I don't think I have an example of use effect. It's kind of a little, it's kind of like React's, it's not really user friendly. A lot of people try to avoid using it because it can get a little difficult, especially because it has what's called a dependency array, where you have to present it with values that it's tracking, whether you feel that the values should be tracked or not. It wants you to add it into that array, and that's where it gets kind of confusing and it causes a lot of re-renders or unnecessary re-renders. And it's kind of like a debate within the React community of whether or not, you know, that's the best way to handle updating state compared to other frameworks like Vue or such. But basically, for our case, we would just want to worry about updating the squares. When we click on this handle click button, we're going to get we're going to take a copy of our array, which is common practice to avoid mutability with an arrays. You want to take a copy of the original array and add to it versus changing the original, so that if you had to go back or keep track of the original, you can still have it stored. So in our case, we're taking the copy and we're setting the value that I is set to an X. This is the context of a tic-tac-toe game, so it's going to be X or O. But in this case, it's just going to set it to X for this demo, and then it will set the squares with the new squares array with the first value being an X. Oh, sorry about that. So a use state is a hook.
Hey, Auroriah, you somehow got muted.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry.
All good.
When did I get muted?
It was just a couple of seconds ago. I think it was just as you were switching over.
Okay. All right. So hooks for React, we saw an example of that with the use state. Is the built-in hook provided by React. Every hook in React starts with the use statement before basically the name of it. So if you want to create your own hooks, you would pretty much just use whatever you want to call it, use something. As I said, use state from the previous slide is a built-in hook from React. And there's different type of hook types that come with React already. There's state hooks, which use state is. It lets you remember information like the user's input, like we saw before. If I would have clicked the board, which I'll show you later on this tic-tac board, it'll update that board from showing null to an X. And then you got context hooks, which lets you receive information from distant parents. So basically, React has a way of sharing data, and I will get into that a little bit later in more details, but it usually trickles data from the top to bottom and shares it through what's called props to children, any child component underneath another component. Another type of hooks is reference hooks, which lets a component hold some information that isn't necessary for rendering, like a DOM node or a timeout ID. This is like in reference for like if you had to use any type of specific DOM elements that are attached strictly to the DOM, and it's not really in React's shadow DOM or anything like that, or usually for like any type of legacy things, like if you had like a jQuery or something like that running on there, you would use like a reference to reference that div or something like that within that component on the DOM to be able to manipulate it. That's kind of probably like over the head a little bit, but it's still kind of, for me, I don't really use ref hooks too much unless it's real, use case oriented, but it's there for you. And the documentation goes well into more details about it. You have effect hooks, which is a component that connects to and synchronizes external systems. So like if you wanted to use animations or the browser DOM functions or any widgets, you would use it within an effect hook, like a layout effect. We also have performance hooks. Now these are probably ones that you'll use like with bigger enterprise applications. It's a common way to optimize the re-rendering in React. React tends to re-render anytime a change is made, and it re-renders the whole page, but it changes just the values that need to be changed. So if you were making like a data fetching call and you wanted to control how many times it was calling, updating, re-rendering, you would use a use memo so that it would cache the results and just check the results to see if there would need to be a change or a rerender to take place. Otherwise, it will just skip over it. And there's other hooks, which are, there's a lot of hooks within React, and you can create your own along with the hooks that are provided for you for various different ways and to accomplish different things. They're basically just like functions that have to be called within the component that allow you to manipulate the DOM, add any type of non-React tools to React. And I find it a lot of times, like a lot of legacy applications that are coming from straight HTML will probably use a lot of like the ref hooks or effect hooks to present the same data as it would if it was just vanilla HTML and JavaScript. So I was saying earlier, sharing data. Data goes on down a waterfall in React, and it's passed down via a thing called props, which is short for properties. To share the data between two components, you usually will have a parent component holding that data, and then two whatever child components within it to pass that data to. So in these examples here, we have a function called myapp, which is the initial component that you would load into when you got into a React. It has a state of count and the function set count, and it's starting with a default value of 0. If we did the handle click, it's going to set count, the original count plus 1. So basically increase it by 1 every time you click it. But in order for these two buttons here to share the same state and not just individually, one would increase and the other one not increase or be different values, they both can share count. So they have a property here called count, or an attribute here called count, and on click. Now these are, the on click is an attribute that comes with HTML, as basic HTML event handling. The count here is what you would use and create. And on the right side here, where this my button component, it's taking in its properties, which is just basically an object or that has the values that you pass in. So count being one property and on click being is another property. You could, of course, name it, on click or whatever you want it to at this point. And it doesn't have to be on click. It could be a handle, increase, count, or whatever you wanted to call it. But in this example, they just kept it on click. So it will get the count to display on the button. So on click count time, how many times it shows it. And that value will stay in sync with the parent myapp on the left here. No matter how many times or which button you click, they're going to have the same value of count. And the on click function is going to be the same function for both those components. Because anytime you create a component, you can have the same component, with the same JavaScript code and have it as many times as you want on another component. So in this case, it got two my buttons. They're the same buttons, but they would update their own state if they kept track of count themselves, and it would be two separate numbers. But if you wanted them to share the state and keep the same state in sync, you pass it to the parent myapp, have the count and set count there, and pass it down to these two functions or two components, and they'll keep in sync with each other. Onto installing React. For React, Node.js is required for local development. It's not necessary to use it in production, but many frameworks basically support it, and you can also export it to basic static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Getting started with React, it used to be as easy as running npx create React app, and then walk you through our options for naming it. It's still functional, you can still do it that way, but it's no longer being supported. I haven't really gotten to the details exactly what they're not supporting about it, but I feel that I believe it's just probably at an older React library version. So you probably wouldn't be able to use tools like the new server components or something like that if you ran create React app. And there's been a lot of changes in the ecosystem, especially with competitors like Vue and Next.js and all that. Well, not Next.js, but Vue and things like that. With React frameworks that come pretty much with data fetching and routing. And back when React first started in 2015, I believe, it was just meant to solve the problems of UI and getting data out visually on the screen. So they didn't see a need necessarily for routing and data fetching. They wanted to keep it simple so that you could also add it to your previous HTML, which you could still do. in parts, but they know that there's a need for people that like using React to be able to use React right out the box or without having to go and add a bunch of libraries. Because before, when you got React, you had to like go in and get React Router if you wanted routing or data fetching. You would have to find a tool like SWR or something like that to data fetch, and cache results and stuff like that, or generate static HTML. You probably have to use another library for that. But they recommend now that you use what they call React-powered frameworks like Next.js, Gatsby, and a few others we'll go through here in a second that allow you to pretty much start using React out the gate without needing to worry about installing any libraries for routing, data fetching, and generating HTML. First one of these powered frameworks is Next.js. It's the one I primarily use a lot. It's a full stack React framework, and it's versatile and lets you create React apps of any size, from mostly static blogs to complex dynamic applications. The biggest thing that they sell on is being able to swap from server-side rendering to client-side rendering, also a static generation of HTML. It's maintained by the company called Vercel, and they make it really easy for you to also upload your projects and host them through Vercel as well. And it's normally free. I haven't had any reason to pay for Vercel myself with small projects, and I haven't gotten any emails of you owe us money or anything like that using it. So I stand by Vercel if you want to get used to working with React. They're a good way to get started and deploy it so you can show it off to whoever you're trying to get a job with or to your friends and family. Basically, if you also want to, you can deploy Next.js app to any Node.js or serverless hosting as well, especially if it supports static HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And Next.js comes with their own app router, which is a newest feature of Next.js. I believe it's on Next.js 13. And it fully implements with React's new server components specification. And that lets you basically build, mix your build time from having server-only components and interactive components from the client side as well on the same React tree. Another one is Remix. I haven't personally used Remix. I want to. It's kind of interesting to me, and I'll probably play with it here soon if I get some time. But it's another React framework. They are maintained by Shopify. It lets you break your app into nested parts, and you can load data in parallel and refresh in response to user action. So basically, you can have like two web pages up at the same time doing two different things, is what they like to boast about. With them, it's kind of more hard to deploy. You have to read the docs a little bit more. You have to pick a deployment target, and if you want to use serverless, you have to write or use already provided what they call adapter to allow it to run within a Node.js or serverless environment. Gatsby is mainly used for CMS-backed websites. It is a really good plugin ecosystem. Gatsby is something I've used like back when I first started. I had no idea what I was doing. In fact, I think it was for like my first project when I was in Code Louisville. It confused me and I didn't know what I was doing, but now I know a lot more about it. It really is good, especially displaying data and using GraphQL. It's supported by Netlify, which is also another good company for hosting websites and stuff free of charge, or at least low cost. You can deploy a Gatsby site to any static hosting, and if you opt in to using their server-only features, you just have to make sure that whatever hosting provider you choose supports for Gatsby. You can get started with using Gatsby with these commands on npx create Gatsby within your terminal, and I'll walk you through a walkthrough of how to get started with it. I'm sorry. Then you have Expo, which is for native apps. This is basically allows you to build Android, iOS, and web apps from one code base using React. It provides the SDK for React Native, and it's maintained by a company called Expo. I played with this a little bit. It's pretty neat. They have if you follow their documentation, it has a way for you to walk through a tutorial and get an app up real quick. And they also have a mobile app that you could download called Expo that allows you to basically debug, well, not necessarily debug, but see your changes taking effect within your mobile phone as you're developing on your computer. So that's pretty neat about it. They're all free, and you can submit your apps to the Google and Apple stores without any restrictions. They also have opt to pay in cloud services. But Expo.dev is their documentation. And all these slides, I'm going to get them to y'all in some way so y'all can have this later for references and check out the links and such like that. Then it's also using React without a framework. Takes a little bit more work. The easiest way I find to do it is using what's called Vite JS.dev. It's the link down here. It'll allow you to easily create a React app. Ignore the My View app, but if you want to call it whatever you want it, you just create Vite at the latest and then template React, depending on which version of NPM you're using. All the versions of 6.x would have to use a double dash template React, and then you have to include this other double dash for some reason if you use NPM 7 or higher. Or you can set up your own JavaScript environment that lets you use JSX syntax and split your codes into modules using import and export and such like that. It takes a little bit more work. I wouldn't recommend it unless you really had a use case for doing so. I've done it like maybe once or twice, and I really just had issues with finding like setting up a Webpack or whatever bundler you want to use to be able to present the React components as is with the shadow DOM. All right. We're gonna go through a walkthrough of a couple of projects that I started up for this, and then I walk through some of the parts and point out some key things that take note of, and then from there we'll move into questions and such. One second, let me see about sharing my screen. Hmm. Some reason it's not giving me the option to share the screen. Yeah, y'all can see the slides, right, Shannon? Not my whole screen.
Auroriah, do you see at the bottom like a rectangle with an arrow?
Yeah, when I click that, it just shows the slides option.
Interesting. I'm not positive. I'm gonna see if it lets me change your. Let me see. I'm gonna add you as a co-host, and I'm hopeful that might fix it.
No, it's still showing me just the screen part. I'm not sure if it's the way I joined that might.
Possibly. It's giving me all the when I click it, it shows that I can join like by a Chrome tab or a window or share my whole screen. Do you want to try exiting and rejoining?
Yeah, if you give me a second, I'll try to do that.
Sure, sounds good.
One second.
I'd offer to do the demo, but I do not have the tech skills for that. So hold tight. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to start throwing those in the chat. There we go. I'm seeing a text editor.
Yeah, I got it now. Oh, yeah, I can see text edit.
It went away for a second, but yes. Yep. Now I
Okay.
can. It's kind of small if you can make it any bigger.
Let's see. Uh-uh. I'm not sure if it's gonna allow me to go any bigger than. Is it like the wording is small or?
Yeah, it that might be okay though. I had like everybody on the side, and then I also have the chat pulled up. So
Yeah, usually allows me to zoom in or something. Make it a little
yeah,
better.
I think that should work.
Okay. All right. So this is basically um, what you would get if you ran the npm vid at the latest template React. It would give you this. It would basically give you all these files here without nothing here has changed. It's just what you get right out the gate. Give you a README with links for more information. The Vit config files required for your package JSON. Here's one of the biggest parts of it is the index.html. This is your basic HTML. This is where you would add your style sheets for if you wanted to have the style sheets come through with the HTML right here. Or and this is also where the React app lives. It does div with the ID of root. So what happens is basically when you start up this project, has a index.jsx, or in this case main.jsx, which brings in the React library, the React DOM library for interacting with the client. Any components that are in our case app component, which is the main component that's going to be ran right away. And then you can also import your CSS. In this case, it's important index.css right here, which is located right above it. Just regular CSS, nothing really special about that. It will run this React DOM function from the React DOM class called create root, which basically grabs the document like you would have in like regular JavaScript and HTML. Document get element by ID, and we're looking for the element root, and then it runs this render function on that, which our app lives in. Now this React.strict mode is strict for like development purposes. It keeps you basically like keeps the rules of React aware to you so that it'll tell you warnings and throw errors for anything that you're not supposed to be doing. But if you could run this without React, without the strict mode, and it'll run just as normal too. I think I did a window on here, so I might have to stop sharing real quick. I just ran the basic command to get the screen to show up. 1 second, I'll show it to y'all. So basically, this is what you get when you run npm run dev. That's just basically, if you look in your package.json and your scripts here, npm run dev, and it just runs this command vit, which spins this up at a port that they'll set for you. In my case, 5173. And it's just a basic demo page that shows the counting example, increasing the count. That is coming from this app.jsx file. It's bringing in the use state we talked about from React, track the state. It got a SVG React logo that you see in the Vit logo. And those are just coming from within this application itself, assets. And then the Vit one is coming from the same folder here. Here's where it's using state. Here's the count and set count and setting the default value to 0. And it's returning the information that you see on the screen right here. So React and Vit. This is an example of having multiple JSX tags. We got a fragment here. It's what they call a fragment in React. It has this div, one div here, and then it has an H1 tag. That's another one. So in order to have all these to be able to coexist within one page, it has to be within a shared parent div or element, and you won't get any errors doing it like that. As you can see, like if I took away this read the docs, it took away, you don't have it right here. Let me see if I can do it. And then like anything else too, like it updates just as you're working on it. This is where it's displaying count from the value up here. It's using curly braces. This is how you would basically escape out back to JavaScript from HTML. So count is curly braces, the word count, which is the value showing up here. And this is what you get running, like I said, the npx command from Vit. Another example of Vit with a little bit more details to it is let's do it like this. It's this tic-tac-toe example I have running. It should run. I don't know if it's. So like basically here I got this board here, and if you click on it, it'll show you X. I haven't really gone through it all to add the zeros yet, but I just wanted to get something up quickly to show how it would work without going through the whole. This is a tutorial on the React dev site that you could go through to practice learning React. And it's just what I wanted to show here is just how basically you would pass props and how you would have like your components separated. So I got my app.jsx file, and before you see all that information and then return here under these fragment, I really don't need this fragment here in this case. But this board is a component that I created, and I'm importing it from a folder called components board, which is located right here. And the board itself doesn't take any type of props, but it holds its own state squares and set squares. It's an array of 9 elements that are null. You have a update function, event handler that sets the squares, takes a copy of the square, sets the first square to an X, and then sets the updated squares as the new array. You have different divs here that hold another component that I created called squares, and this one does take props called value and on square click. That's being pulled in on the top here. Import square from, it's in the same folder, the components, and it's located right here. And same deal here. You got curly braces, object with each value that is its props. So we got value and on square click. So anytime I click on the square, it gets this function ran onto it, being passed down to on square click. I have it done in an arrow function here because our anonymous function, because if you use parentheses on a component, and if I would have just put handle click with the parentheses, it would continuously run and re-render and run that handle click method automatically. This way it doesn't run automatically until I click it, but allows me to pass the params that I need to to that function. In this case, 0, 1, 2, and 3 for each square that is available. And it takes that value, displays the value. In this case, it's going to be an XRO. And anytime you click on it, it will run it'll set the X in this case. Right down here is just how you would do type checking. Usually when I do React apps, I do it in a TypeScript, which allows you to do TypeScript type checking within the whole ecosystem itself, and like setting the values of what you expect within the function. But you can also download a library and install it via npm called prop types. And that's what this does. It just sets the value, expecting it to be a string, and on square click, expecting it to be a function. And that is so that if you was ever developing a big application and you didn't know necessarily, you didn't want to dig through where square was located and you wanted to pass values here, it would throw an error saying squares is not a value is not a string, or whatever you passed into the curly braces for on square click isn't a function, and it would just warn you on that. Same deal with the CSS. We got app CSS here that brings it in, and then I just fill out my CSS like I got board row after, which displays and then clears it, in different CSS concepts that you use to be able to build the board out. Now I could separate this and put it within board and have its own CSS. But the key thing with React is basically being able to build small components with one area of focus, following like the principles of object-oriented programming, and keeping one, purpose for each component to do something. So this case is just taking the value and displaying it to the user, an updated value, and then board's job is to show all the squares and present them with the ability to update themselves. And then app.jsx displays the board as the component. Now, I wouldn't necessarily need this function app. It's not a requirement. It's just a convention. If I wanted to, I could delete this whole file. But if I did, I would have to make sure that in my main JSX file, the root component has to have a root component, like a component has to be here. I would have to make board that component in this case. But I'd also lose like all the CSS that came with app and all that. I have to readjust everything if I was coming from this point to do that. One other example, I show Next.jsx. This is the actual project that I'm working on with a couple of devs for immersive transportation. But this is an example, a more complex example of using React with Next.js and also using TypeScript. So I got TypeScript files here. Let me see real quick if I go to components. Let's see if I got any good examples. So like here's an example of a user created. I created a hook called user, which is basically checking if there's a user, and if it's not, it redirects them to the dashboard if they're not logged in. Another example would be like, let me see. This is kind of like more TypeScript. Like I want to letting TypeScript know that I'm creating a React functional component, and that's more of the type checking without having to use that prop types that I showed before. And it's just a little different with TypeScript. Like you could create your own types. So in case here I got a type called load that expects a couple strings from these values here, and things like that. But that's just basically React. Let's see here.
Auroriah, there was a question in the chat from Michael, and he was wondering if you can touch a bit on how single page applications work in React.
Okay, yeah. So basically, for single page applications, They the basic React vid that I showed. Hold on, let me put this back up quick. This would be itself basically a single page. Is it's not reaching out to any servers or being on any hosted on any servers, strictly in the client side, and it's everything you do is client side. It's not doing any data fetching or anything like that, making it easier to use it. That was the one with the vid and the account button on it, and the same with the tic tac toe. Basically, just single page applications are just non-server applications that run on the client side that load either static information from the client side or allow you to interact with it with like updating events and running events within client side. So I'm not calling out to any servers, no downloading server information from the server, and it's just a lot faster because it's running straight within the browser itself, uh, like an app, like a browser was like a mobile phone or something. And that's just basically what a single page app is. It's basically like an application for the web browser itself.
Uh, Michael followed up. He was asking if it's similar to Blazor and .NET.
Blazor itself is actually a server rendered application. Um, it's similar in the fact that they have components and things like that, but it's a little bit more like just server oriented, and it uses I believe single R or like a pub sub type deal where it basically gets a signal, processes the request and sends back what needs to be sent back. So you have to run Blazor within a server. React, you wouldn't necessarily need a server. I'm not sure if Blazor allows you to do like static bundling or anything like that, so you can host it on a serverless. But it would be more akin to like Razor in a sense, allowing more for client side. Like React, the library itself is just strictly client side. The only reason it got any kind of server interaction is with the new server components coming out, and then using Next.js or one of the powered frameworks.
Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to either raise your hand or throw them in the chat. And in the meantime, Aurora, I know you mentioned sharing your slides. If you want to send those to me, I can share them when we share the recording out later this week. It usually takes overnight before the recording comes through, but I can share that.
Okay, that sounds good.
We have a question from Matthew. He's wondering, for someone who has a basic foundation in vanilla JavaScript, so he, for example, graduated the web dev pathway, how long might it take to get comfortable with React for someone who's kind of new to it?
If you're just coming off JavaScript, would be the easiest way to get like javascript.info. I'm sorry, this link here, javascript.info. I would use to help you like just navigate through some of the information on JavaScript. And if you're pretty good with JavaScript, I would start right away. That's kind of what I did. It's kind of writing the JavaScript itself is easier if you, especially if you understand like the functions and the function calls. But if you don't like, it depends on your comfortability, I say, with JavaScript, really. Just about, I would focus on like using map, using arrays, and how to mutate data within arrays without destroying that data, like immutability. I also would focus on like you would have just to worry about like if you went through the React tutorial at react.dev, it'd be a good way to start and you kind of see where you're at, but it's not too hard to get into right away. The complexity comes into it when you start using like TypeScript or you try to use one of the other frameworks. You'd have to read their docs to see how you do specific things. Like for example, Next.js has like kind of weird, especially on version 12, where you can't use certain hooks or things within what they call non-server components or regular React components. But if you're comfortable with JavaScript, you can pretty much get away with using it, because what you're really doing is just, you're building everything. You don't have to use any JavaScript in a sense with the React. Like, you don't necessarily have to have a state with count. You could just mess with it of showing data and stuff like that, and then gradually add different, JavaScript functions as you will to navigate through it.
I see one more question from Dallas asking what the job market in Louisville is like for React. And I'll just say from my end, because I spend a lot of time talking to employers, that I see React a lot. I actually was in a call today with, it was a recruiter for startups more on the coast, but he's Louisville based and Kentucky based, and wanted to hear more about our program. And he said he's seeing a lot of React. I've had quite a few recruiter type folks or hiring managers mention React to me in the last few weeks for roles that we share in our jobs channel. So I would say it's definitely worth looking into for web dev folks. I think it's really popular.
Yeah, just a second there. Yeah, it's grown a lot, especially since a lot of people are starting to see that it's a powerful tool to use, and especially with the other frameworks, and they're combining power, help working closely with Vercel to help build the React servers and make it more compete with Blazor and Vue and Angular and all those. A lot of times, when I first got presented with the project I'm working on now, they wanted to use either Angular or React or something like that. They weren't too familiar with how React started. We went up with Next.js just because that was right when React was kind of shutting down Create React App and integrating more so with the other frameworks. And I just took the choice on moving into Next.js to give us all the data fetching and our routing and stuff like that. But if you basically use React just plain, you can add it within your own HTML, so you can gradually add it in. You don't necessarily always have to. You have a full-blown React framework. So if you had already HTML, CSS, or whatnot, you could just import the React library as you would any other script tag within the HTML, and then set a div to target that as to show your component, and you can gradually, add it in there. So it's definitely grown.
Well, thank you, Auroriah, so much for joining us tonight. And we will definitely be sharing the slides as well as the recording here in Slack in a couple days. Promise it'll be there. But thank you all again. For modular students, please remember to fill out the form on your Google Classroom to get credit for attending the event. And thank you all again so much for being here. We look forward to seeing you in coming weeks.
Well, thank you for having me. And if you see me in Slack, man, have any questions with React, feel free to hit me up. I love answering questions and helping people out, man.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Roya. And thanks, everyone. Have a great night.